Greetings and good evening, beautiful people. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Hope you're having a fantastic day and week. Welcome to our live weekly YouTube readings of the final report of the California Reparations Task Force right here on the CJEC YouTube channel. This is the only live reading of California Reparations Task Force's final report on YouTube. The final report of the first in the nation California Reparations Task Force is one of, if not the most, important government reports about the Black American community since the 1960s. Equally important is also the foundation for current and future reparation legislation in California. The report is nearly 1,100 pages long, and we are bringing every page of it to you, chapter by chapter, every week on Thursdays at 7 p.m. PST, so that you are properly educated in your advocacy for reparations in California. Today's reading of the final report is presented to you as a community service with support from the Reparations Organizing and Mobilizing Team at the Coalition for Just and Equitable California. CJEC is California's leading grassroots organization born for reparations and reparative justice for Black American freedom living in California. For more info on CJEC and our work helping to enact the law that created the California Reparations Task Force, California's law requiring state agencies to collect data on descendants of U.S. slavery that act to end current slavery in California's state prisons, the California's Freedom Affair Bill, and more, visit www.cjecofficial.org. Before we go any further, right now I need you to do three things. First, connect to our YouTube channel by liking this video, hitting the bell for reminders, and subscribing to our YouTube channel. Second, get connected to us on social media by following CJEC on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and Twitter/X. CJEC Official. Finally, get informed and involved. To do that, visit www.cjecofficial.org to sign up for current and accurate California reparations news and info on our Get Involved page, and support our work by volunteering and or donating. To donate, just click the Donate tab on our homepage of our website. Special thanks to our amazing fiscal sponsor, the California Black Women's Health Project. You can learn more about our fiscal sponsor at the California Black Women's Health Project at www.cabwhp.org. By way of introduction, my name is Marchand, and I am working with my grandmother, Raphael H. Plunkett. She is a volunteer reparations advocate with CJEC's Reparations Organizing and Mobilizing Team. The agenda for today, Chapter 32 of the final report of the California Reparations Task Force. The title of today's chapter we're reading tonight, Harm and Repair. You can follow along in the reading, download tonight's chapter or the full final report yourself by going to our website, www.cjecofficial.org/reports. Okay, we're about ready to start our reading, but before we do, I have some special thanks and announcements to make. First, as always, I'd like to thank our good friends at ETM Media Group on YouTube for their live readings of the first California Reparations Report. You can watch their readings of the first report on their channel at ETM Media Group on YouTube and on our website, www.cjecofficial.org/videos. Second, for those of you who don't know, historic reparations legislation in California is here, and more is coming. 490 is California's first lineage-based reparations-related legislation to establish the California American Freedom Affairs Agency. The bill was introduced by State Senator Stephen Bradford and will move forward this year. To read the bill, visit www.cjecofficial.org/advocacy. Third, as mentioned, more historic reparation bills are coming. Over the next several months, more reparation bills will be written. During this 2024 legislative sessions, we'll see those bills introduced and start moving toward passage by majorities of both the California State Assembly and Senate. To pass reparation bills in 2024, we need 41 Assembly members and 21 senators to say yes. When those bills are passed, we need our governor to sign the bills. So, to make reparations a reality in California, the math is 41 plus 21 plus 1. That's 41 Assembly members, 21 senators, and 1 governor. 41 plus 21 plus 1 equals reparations in California. Lastly, but not least, special thanks to CJEC's reparation organizing and mobilizing teams, specifically our volunteer final report readers. And without further ado, here's my grandmother, Raphael, reading Chapter 32 of the California Reparations Task Force's final report.
Thank you, Marchand. This is Raphael Plunkett speaking. I will continue reading Chapter 32, Harm and Repair, at page 930, starting at Opportunities for and Investments in Black Organizations and Initiatives. A majority of participants within the community listening sessions described, in one way or another, a vision for reparations that included greater investments in the development and expansion of Black infrastructure. Many believed that more infrastructure development in Black communities for business development, nonprofit development, or other institutional support could improve economic opportunities and proposed expansion of the following opportunities and programs: creating new and supporting existing business infrastructure, developing robust culturally relevant education systems, supporting nonprofit and community organizations to promote permanency of Black institutions, Black business initiatives and opportunities. An overwhelming number of participants communicated their preference for opportunities and initiatives to increase and uplift Black businesses as a form of reparations. They favored investment in Black business ventures because they believed that, quote, investing in Black businesses and creating or expanding opportunities would set Black people and their endeavors up for success, end quote. Many also referenced the need for business development because of past harms by white society in destroying successful Black businesses. Many shared examples and stories of this in great detail. One in particular noted they need to rebuild Black Wall Street. Quote, rebuilding Black Wall Street, not just Oklahoma, but all states, all cities, all counties, taking control so that we have the power with that. With good financial backing, good financial stability and reserves, we can put our Black dollars together and we can purchase. Now, we all have investment within our community. We're getting residuals for that. I did some follow-up and some research, and one young gentleman, not Black, went into our Black community where no one else wanted to go and invest and got the people to invest. And so now they get residuals in that community. They built a store, they build markets, they build clothing stores, and they all own a piece of that and get a monthly residual. He said it took craftiness to do it as far as a legal concern, but he got it done. And so now, within that Black community, people feel, prideful. They have ownership. They keep their community up. They buy, recycle their Black dollars, and buy within their community. And that's where we need to be. We need to have that power because as far long as I've known, we are on these calls. We talk about moving forward. We don't. And we're wondering why. I believe that financially, if we get ourselves together with our finances, credit, ownership, land, property, we have that power to move forward and build and do what we need to do. End quote. Others recounted their experiences of the past with community-based businesses and their understanding of the significance of seeing Black businesses on a regular basis. One participant recounted, quote, it would be nice if it could go kind of back to the way it was, where you found some more Black people, right? Like back in the day, right? When it was Black businesses, Black shops, Black folks. That felt good. It felt like you had a place in the world, like you belonged somewhere. The way it is now, it seems like we're being pushed out, end quote. Another referenced their experiences from a recent trip that sparked excitement around the possibility and significance of investing in the creation and sustainment of black business infrastructure. Quote, I recently just got back from Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I got to visit Black Wall Street, and I got to be in that energy, that vibration of blacks working for themselves and creating for themselves and just succeeding for themselves. And I feel that Oakland, Black Oakland, you feel me, definitely has those qualities. And being a child of the 90s, like I got to see that in my lifetime, and I feel that it's not lost, but it needs to be reinvented. And there's people in our black culture that's too often been not asked to sit at the table. So I feel that there will be a seat for everyone, whether you're queer, whether you're straight, whatever religion you are, because we need each other to succeed. End quote. Many participants saw investing in black businesses as a way to enhance black neighborhoods and cities, promote individual entrepreneurship, as well as an avenue to build wealth for families and individuals. For instance, a couple of participants mentioned the idea of reparations in the form of designated areas zoned for black businesses. Black business zoning would be a pipeline to bring up young black entrepreneurs. So, quote, they can get started early on, and by the time they become young adults, they'll be well versed in how to operate and run a business, end quote. Another participant reflected this same sentiment, noting, quote, I'm really interested in supporting black neighborhoods and developing policies and practices to promote locating healthy retail sources within the black community. And that goes back to what I was saying, that we don't have nothing zoned for our people, for black people. Once you hit the 46th, going down East 14th, it's all Latino businesses. That's their thing. That's their whole environment right there, So I would like to see something like that where we have our businesses so we can bring kids through there so they can see parents developing and creating businesses so they have something to aspire to and learn from. End quote. Quality educational improvements, resources, and opportunities. A majority of participants were in favor of the expansion of educational resources and opportunities for black students and teachers in the form of 1. Free college education, 2. Student debt relief, 3. Financial support for historically black colleges and universities, HBCUs. 4. Initiatives for enhancing representation of black teachers and black curriculum. And 5. The creation of alternative black schools. First, the participants emphasized the potential impact of student debt relief and free college education across multiple generations. Quote, for me personally, I believe that the best and probably easiest and most efficient way to deliver reparations would be to eliminate student debt for all African Americans in this country, regardless of how much it is, and to provide an open door for African Americans and their descendants to as much free education. If you want to get 5 PhDs, you can actually do that as you want for the next 300 years, end quote. In addition to investing in individual students, many participants reiterated the importance of providing free college education to black students through monetary investment in HBCUs to enable black students to attend for free. Another major region of potential educational reparations was identified in increased funding and support for black teachers to enhance representation and inspire black studies within the K-12 system. For instance, some participants supported expanding the representation of black teachers by providing incentives or extra stipends to recruit and retain black teachers. Participants saw this as a crucial way to support black students emotionally within the curriculum. Quote, I feel that the more black teachers we have, that our black students would have a better chance because they know our struggle, and they know how to address our needs. They know how to address the type of curriculum we need and want. They know how to address, every aspect of our lives. So I think the more black teachers, the better chance our black students will have, end quote. Listening session participants were widely in favor of expanding available resources and support for black educators and those aspiring to become educators. Specifically, participants voiced their support for providing greater opportunities to enter the field of teaching, which would incentivize and promote increased entry into teaching professionals by black individuals. Participants felt that this would not only serve to support black children within the classroom, but also to offset the current supply deficit of teaching personnel within K-12 classrooms. As one participant noted, Quote, I guess what I might add as an addition to funding for free tuition in colleges, like free credentials, to make teacher credentialing free and to reduce the barriers to the profession, like the CBEST and CSET. End quote. In addition to increasing black representation in the teaching professions, participants called for overhauling, quote, the history and curriculum in literature when it comes to actually telling the whole truth about black and African American history, end quote, to educate students about their heritage and history before and beyond slavery. In the same vein, other participants stated that instead of investing in non-black education institutions, there should be an investment to, quote, create our own black schools to teach our own kids, because why would we continue to trust a system that has systematically miseducated us for years, end quote. Support for black nonprofits and community organizations. Many participants expressed the need for increased support for the advancement of black nonprofit organizations and community organizations. They advocated for the creation of black-led nonprofits, greater funding allocations, and reduced red tape. Participants emphasized expanding the availability of resources, including startup funding and property acquisition, to enable more black individuals to launch black-serving organizations. One individual described disparities within the current nonprofit infrastructure, demonstrating the need for black individuals to create and operate these organizations in addition to receiving the financial support to do so. Quote, we're trying to figure out how to get dollars to support us having an infrastructure for black folks to actually access education, quality education, K through 12 or preschool through 12, but then higher education. For the organization, in the sense of the nonprofit itself, what I see is how much money we don't get, right? How we are discriminated against, not only being black, but then also being women, right? That there has to be infrastructure or a similar setup, that there is an endowment for black organizations, specifically in California, to ensure that we get funding, right? End quote. These participants also highlighted the need to receive funding to start and sustain these organizations. As one individual puts it, quote, the funding to start and grow and make sustainable black nonprofit organizations, I think, is key. I remember my board not coming through on their donations and funders not coming through, and I had to sell my washing machine and dryer to pay my staff because I wanted to walk in integrity with them, right? End quote. Participants went on to express how black organizations were often underfunded relative to other non-black organizations. One participant described their experience in trying to secure funding for their nonprofit, citing the unequal distribution of funds received relative to white-led nonprofit organizations. She said, quote, there's a lot of discrimination in the nonprofit world. So, I don't know if you guys all know this, but black-led, black-benefiting nonprofits receive 76% less than white-led, white-benefiting nonprofits in terms of unrestricted funding. End quote. The participants shared their belief that black individuals leading nonprofits should receive comparable treatment to their white counterparts, and that the government has a responsibility to step in to address these disparities that are evident in the data. As one nonprofit leader shared, quote, with unrestricted funding, what ends up happening is the person who's giving you the money, they trust you to use the money that you need in order to advance your mission versus directing you how you should use their money by saying, oh, this has to go for direct services. And I really think California needs to investigate this because I have a white grant writer, and that white grant writer will testify before the state legislature that when he writes the same grant for a white-led organization, 90% of the time they get the funding. When he writes it for me, it's 10%, okay? So we can bring this up, and people will be dismissive of it. But if we have actual concrete evidence, then I think we need to get before the state legislature and share that. End quote. Discussions around support of black-led organizations not only involved the expansion of funding opportunities, but also included reducing the red tape that regulates these organizations by government and other external entities. Many participants were concerned about the many stipulations black-led organizations must adhere to, such as referrals, process, and board protocol, to operate and qualify for funding. Some participants argued that these regulations cause complications for both the internal organization and its service population, black communities. One participant noted how increased representation in stakeholder settings is important to influencing these policies, saying, quote, increasing the equitable representation of black people in the shareholder group increases our ability to influence policies and procedures that impact our individual lives, the well-being of our families, and the country as a whole, end quote. Ultimately, in addition to enhanced funding allocations to these organizations, participants advocated for autonomy over their own organizational affairs and operations. A couple of the participants described the necessity for organizations that are black-led, black-operated, and black-serving to have agency and independence over their management. As one nonprofit leader detailed, quote, the state needs to endow a black community foundation that they don't run, they just fund, but that the funds are available for us all to be able to do our work long term, and to be able to pay our staff more than living wages, to be able to honor the work, to be able to shift and change the narrative, end quote. Investments towards sustaining black families, neighborhoods, and community spaces. Land and property ownership. Finally, one of the most popular forms of reparations mentioned in the listening sessions centered around land and property ownership. Participants cited land and property ownership as an important vehicle to secure generational wealth. Participants referenced the history of land ownership for Black Americans, citing the history of failed promises, property destruction, and theft by government and white society as reasons for reparations of this kind. There is wide acknowledgement that, quote, land was stolen and it needs to be returned, end quote. A few individuals shared stories relative to having their family's land seized and stolen from them, and one individual in particular references his family's efforts to trace and obtain their ancestors' property. Quote, I'm here to talk about Nelson Bell, one of the few African American settlers during the gold rush in Coloma, California. He passed away in January 1869. At that time, his land and personal property was put into probate and later sold by the probate administrator. The land is now part of a California state park. We have good reason to believe that we are the descendants of Nelson Bell. We have historical records and documents from a certified genealogist and information from Ancestry.com that indicates our kinship to Nelson Bell. He is, in fact, my fourth great-grandfather. We have employed a certified genealogist in the state of Virginia to research historical records in that state regarding Nelson Bell, and so far, the results have been very positive. Additional research is currently ongoing. We also have registered with Where Is My Land? Our purpose is to seek reparations once the research is complete and supports our position, end quote. In another example, a participant expressed similar sentiments of wanting to repurchase their family's property. Quote, is there any programs that would help us gain land? Now, back east where I was born and raised, I'd like to be able to go back and buy my grandfather's farm back. They all passed away back in the middle to late 60s. The farm has been sitting idle. A couple of years ago, a couple of Amish people bought the farm, but they have done nothing with it. The house and the barn and stuff were built before the 1900s. Grandpa moved there in 1906 and was still there till the 60s when they passed away. Grandma and Grandpa, but I mean, the house is still standing, it's leaning, and it's probably full of snakes and stuff. But I would love it if there was some kind of program, or I guess you call it a program or organization or something, where I could buy back, especially land that was in the family, end quote. The importance of owning and maintaining land cannot be understated, as a variety of individuals acknowledge that land and property ownership is an important vehicle to secure generational wealth. However, it was mentioned that for many black people to have the capital to acquire land in the first place, quote, we need grants to start them up because they stole all that from us, end quote. Similarly, another participant cited this form of reparations as the primary way to right, quote, the wrongs that have been done, end quote. Home ownership and housing accessibility initiatives. Many listening session participants cited the need for increased access to affordable housing as a form of reparations. They referenced renter relief programs, reduction or elimination of mortgage loans, property tax reductions and cancellations, and additional housing subsidies and vouchers as examples of how this form of reparations might be put into practice. One idea frequently referenced by participants pertained to the adjusting the costs of housing. The proposed initiative would entail modifying property values, creating limits on housing/rental costs increases, and regulating mortgage interest rates. In addition to land and home ownership, some participants suggested reparations come in the form of, quote, sovereign land for all indigenous and melanated people of the land, end quote, to occupy states and or cities to, quote, govern and build our own economy, end quote. Conservation of Black cultural hubs and community spaces. Many participants, while discussing their vision for Black California, described a vision of Black neighborhoods and hubs in which they could occupy space, free of surveillance, fear, and limitations to their cultural expression. For many, investing in Black communities meant investing in the environmental health of their neighborhoods. One participant described their vision for Black California as, quote, neighborhoods with clean air, neighborhoods with thriving economic centers, access to safe outdoor recreational spaces within walking distance of our homes, end quote. Another participant echoed this perspective, saying, quote, to me, I feel like Black California should have the opportunity to focus on ways in which we can thrive so that it feels like a joyful place. It feels like a place where our entire being is considered financially, politically, culturally, that we are taken care of, that our health is seen more holistically, and so it tastes like good food that is affordable. It feels like good housing that is affordable. It sounds like bustling neighborhoods that play cultural music. It sounds like the exhaust from the sideshows. It's the music coming out of the scraper bikes. That's what it sounds like, end quote. Participants reminisced about current Black cultural community staples that they have seen disappear over time. For instance, one participant referenced the Ashby Flea Market in South Berkeley that was, quote, dwindling down, end quote, saying, quote, everybody knew to be there Saturday and Sunday. You could be there all day, get what you want to get, eat whatever, come back, whatever. It was a cultural thing for us, even though it's a lot of Afrocentric stuff, but it was ours, you know? And then now it's different. It's just on life support. And that's what you see. A lot of these different areas that we knew were our neighborhoods are literally on life support, if that, end quote. Participants who shared this opinion felt that investing in and preserving Black communities would involve increasing Black representation in leadership, creating spaces of refuge, safety, and family, and preserving Black community centers and cultural hubs. One participant said that they wanted, quote, a full place dedicated to Black people, end quote, where they could have, quote, a place to have peace of mind, a place where we can call our own and we can feel safe, end quote. They called for institutional investments to sustain Black communities and neighborhoods to create a resurgence of Black commerce, Black buildings, Black bars, and Black restaurants, end quote. Discussion of eligibility. Eligibility has been a central topic since the task force began meeting in June of 2021, and discussions in the listening sessions about eligibility were centered on the following question: who should be eligible for reparations and why? The listening session conversations around eligibility mirror the diverse perspectives showcased in the public convenings held by the task force. Two prominent perspectives consistently emerged during these conversations. One, support for lineage-based reparations eligibility, and two, support for the eligibility of all Black people, regardless of lineage. Support of eligibility qualifications on the basis of ancestry to those enslaved was slightly more referenced than support for extending eligibility to all Black people in California. Support for lineage-based reparations. Many participants agreed with the task force's decision to limit reparations to those who are descendants of enslaved Africans in the U.S. They often mentioned the generational impacts of having elders in their family struggle due to their experience as enslaved people. Other participants in favor of lineage-based reparations referred to past promises owed to formerly enslaved Black people in the U.S. that the government had failed to follow through on. One participant remarked, quote, I think the people who should be eligible for reparations should be descendants of enslaved people. And the reason why is because we were all offered our 40 acres and the mule, end quote. In many other instances, as cited throughout this report thus far, participants referenced the large role that the institution of slavery had played in the founding and succession of the U.S. Support for the eligibility of all black people, regardless of lineage. Participants who supported extended eligibility for all black residents of California often cited the broader impacts of anti-black racism that black Californians experienced regardless of whether they are direct descendants of enslaved Africans in the U.S. One participant stated, quote, as a pastor, I've seen people at all levels, black people at all levels, being affected by racism and a product of slavery. So if they're rich, poor, brilliant, or not so brilliant, each one of them have been affected in one way or another. So I believe that all black people, every single last one of them, should get some form of reparations. And I say this because racism doesn't care what part of the continent you're from, what part of the country you are from, how well educated you are. It still has a negative effect. End quote. Two other participants reiterated this sentiment. One participant noted the expansiveness of racism and enslavement. Quote, all our tribes should be eligible for reparations because we've been separated, scattered, and unavailable to utilize the resources that we kind of built on. So I think all black people, end quote. Another participant stated, quote, so yes, I think every black person deserves some type of reparations because we all have experienced what it feels like to be whipped, whether it be an actual whip, whether it be a mental whip, whether it be you redlined in whatever community or wherever you grew up at, end quote. Other participants supported reparations for all black people because of concerns about lineage-based reparations. They stated that some black residents may not have paperwork to verify their lineage, and therefore that factor would limit who could get reparations. Section 4. In-depth interviews, oral histories, and personal testimony analysis and findings. This section reports the findings from the in-depth interviews, oral histories, and analysis of the personal testimonies self-submitted to the task force portal. It also focuses on the major ideas of inquiry, harm, support for reparations, and who should be eligible for reparations. Two methods were used to obtain personal testimony. 1. Personal Testimony Portal. Community members were able to access the portal through a web link to upload self-guided testimony to Box, a secure cloud-based content management system. 2. Oral history interviews. Several community members were invited to complete a semi-structured oral history interview with the oral historian on the Bunch Center team. Data. Personal Testimony Portal. On the UCLA Bunch Center website, the box link for the Personal Testimony Portal was titled the, quote, Reparations Task Force Community Listening Session Testimony Portal, end quote. The portal allowed community members to upload their personal testimony to submit to the task force. In all, 46 testimonies were submitted via the portal between May 10 and September 1, 2022. The testimonies were multimedia content, including audio and video recordings of personal testimony, written documents, photos, and flyers. The portal link was disseminated through anchor organizations, community listening sessions, and task force members. The guidelines provided to respondents indicated they could state their name and/or their connection to California or remaining anonymous. The guidelines also indicated respondents could upload a 3 to 5 minute recording focused on the harms, eligibility, or what reparations should entail. Clicking the link led respondents to Box to upload their testimony using a web-enabled device. Before the upload, respondents were further informed that private personal information would be kept confidential. Of the 46 testimonies submitted, 93% of participants indicated they were African American, with some specifically identifying themselves as descendants of persons enslaved in the United States. 2 respondents identified themselves as white, and 1 identified as an American of Yoruba descent. Additionally, while most respondents indicated they were California residents, 2 respondents identified themselves as residents of other states. Oral history interviews. Oral history interviews were conducted with 7 individuals between August 4 and August 31, 2022. Oral history interviewees, hereafter referred to as narrators, were identified through their connection with anchor organizations. 3 men and 4 women, all African American, with ages ranging from 38 to 88 years, were interviewed. All narrators were California residents, split almost evenly between Northern and Southern California. Methodology: Personal Testimony Portal. From the personal testimony files, audio and video files were converted to written format using Otter AI, a text transcription software that uses artificial intelligence. These transcripts were manually analyzed for recurring themes using Taget, an open-source tool for coding text-based qualitative data. A grounded theory of qualitative analysis was employed to analyze these materials. Thus, instead of specifying themes before the analysis was begun, the researcher identified themes through the process of analysis by noting recurring words, phrases, and ideas. Given the self-directed nature of the submission process, a grounded theory was chosen to best capture the richness of the data before classification. As participants continued to submit testimony through September 1, 2022, the themes were updated and refined. Photo submissions were analyzed for content and context. Notably, the photos tended to include less specifically usable information than the files in other formats. The researchers noted individuals and details in the images' connections between submitted images in a set where they may have, for instance, related to the same events or individuals, and she outlined questions to obtain additional contextual information. Oral history interviews. In total, the contact information for 8 potential narrators was provided to the Bunch research team. The oral historian contacted all 8 individuals to conduct interviews. Ultimately, oral history interviews were conducted with all 7 narrators who affirmed interest. Upon initial outreach via phone or email, the oral historian conducted a preliminary interview with each narrator. These calls ranged from 15 minutes to an hour in length. During that time, the oral historian explained that the interview would focus on illustrating the harms that African Americans have experienced in the aftermath of slavery and Jim Crow. From this preliminary interview, the oral historian and narrator worked together to develop the scope of the interview, targeting the specific areas of harm to which the narrators felt best able to speak. All interviews followed a largely similar format, obtaining family and personal background, specifying identification, detailing harms, and naming potential remedies. Given the innate personal nature of each narrator's experience of harm, a semi-structured interview methodology was employed. From the preliminary interview through the end of the interview, narrators were invited to introduce new topics and experiences as they surfaced. Several narrators also opted to provide documents for the oral historian to review in preparation for the interview. While the harms focused mainly on the narrator, most narrators also provided stories about other family members' experiences. In witnessing their experiences, the oral historian used probing questions to help the narrators provide as much detail as possible on their individual experiences of harm. Duration. All interviews took place between August 4 and August 31, 2022. On average, each interview session lasted 1 hour and 13 minutes, with the shortest interview lasting 38 minutes and the longest an hour and a half. Narrators who provided testimony that required more than 2 hours to communicate were invited to participate in a subsequent session. Overall, 3 narrators completed at least 2 interview sessions. Ultimately, 11 interview sessions with the 7 narrators were conducted in total. Consent form. All interviewees were provided a consent form included in the appendix, either through email or physical mail. This form indicated that participation in the project was voluntary, the interviews were to be recorded, and recorded materials would become property of the UCLA Ralph J. Bunch Center for African American Studies. Completed consent forms were obtained and digitally stored. In one instance, where a participant could not receive a digital consent form before the interview, the consent form was read aloud, verbal consent was recorded, and a physical consent form was mailed. Format and analysis. All narrators were interviewed remotely. One narrator was interviewed over the phone, while all others completed their interviews through the Zoom video conferencing platform. After the interviews were complete, the audio files were transcribed using Otter AI, and transcripts were uploaded to Taget. The researcher used inductive and deductive analysis to assess the transcripts of each oral history. The themes generated from the personal testimony portal submissions were manually applied and refined to analyze the interview transcripts, and new themes were incorporated. Findings from the personal testimony portal. The most frequently occurring themes that emerged from the self-submitted personal testimonies were financial compensation, direct cash payments, education, housing and land ownership, lineage-based reparations. Please note that in all excerpts below, bolded words and phrases reflect spaces where the researcher has added emphasis to highlight the emergence of a theme that the excerpt illustrates. Financial compensation. Respondents emphasized the importance of financial compensation. Notably, even those who advocated for multifaceted forms of reparations included financial compensation as a requisite. Respondent, but the first and primary demand is for financial repair, and that will help close the wealth gap. And while we can never really put a dollar value on the harms that were experienced, we can start fresh in actually saying that there was harm that was done, and that the government will pay. And according to some works, for instance, I believe in From Here to Equality by William Darity Jr., they have equated the value, in terms of unpaid wages, with a pretty conservative interest rate. They come up with about $20 trillion. We actually have seen figures that are as high as a quadrillion of dollars. So basically, the government owes a debt to Black Americans. Santa Rosa, California resident. Respondent, I believe that reparations should be a multi-pronged approach. There should be free education for descendants for as long as slavery was practiced in the United States. That would ensure generations of African Americans in principle have the same opportunity to right the wrongs that were handed down to slaves over the hundreds of years. We cannot approach this as a one-time, one-off event. This should be a years-long endeavor. Free education to HBCUs or any other college of choice, business grants, home loans, either significantly reduced interest rates or zero rates for as long as necessary, 40 acres and a tractor with access to mortgage and commercial loans, family trust and education around how to manage wealth and pass it down to heirs, life insurance policies that are matched to ensure legacy funds are passed down. Respondent with connections to Richmond, California. Direct cash payments. Consistent with financial compensation, respondents reiterated the need for direct cash payments as an integral component of reparations. Respondent, I also believe the California Reparations Plan should emphasize direct cash compensation to the descendants of U.S. slavery. Let me repeat that. I also believe the California Reparations Plan should emphasize direct cash compensation to the descendants of U.S. slavery. Diamond Bar resident. Pointedly, one respondent cited Oregon Senate Bill 619 as a potential template for the provision of direct cash payments. Respondent, now, for me, cash payments can be modeled after Oregon Senate Bill 619, which essentially offers anyone who's an American slave ancestor who's been claiming black for the last 10 years on documents $125,000 a year in lifetime payments, tax-free. I believe that the cost of living in Oregon compared to California is 39% less of the cost of living in California. So that would mean that we need a direct cash payments policy. And I'm talking about direct to those who are harmed, not into a trust to be governed by institutions. Directly to the people is the best way to fix the harms that we've survived and to address the debts we have, as well as poverty itself. But these direct cash payments, if it's $125,000 in Oregon, that would mean it needs to be $177,000 per person every year for life in California. And that's still separate from the land that we're owed. New York resident raised in Alameda, California. Educational resources and opportunities. Many calls for reparations included educational components, usually relating to access and support services. Several interviewees explained how educational experiences were disrupted due to lack of opportunity or financial constraints. Respondent: both of my parents never completed high school, only work, 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 while living in the projects of New Jersey. New Jersey resident. Several respondents supported tuition-free college and student loan forgiveness. However, illustrating her daughter's experience at a California state institution, one parent emphasized the need for support, not just to attend, but to succeed in higher education programs. Respondent: in the case of my eldest daughter, she made it to Cal State LA. While she was there, they determined that she was remedial and needed to be in remedial classes. We were shocked to learn that, as I have been a lifelong volunteer at her school. She graduated with high grades. She had no issues of being remedial in the system. And she graduated high school and was optimistic about her future. When she finally signed into the class, we figured we had no choice. She had to sign up for this class, this series of classes, to be able to even get classes that were going to be worth credit. It turns out that the entire student group in that class was young black students. My husband and I found it shocking, absolutely shocking. We questioned it, we challenged it. There was no other alternative. And she continued through the program. She made it through the first semester, and she got decent grades, and she seemed to be on her way to becoming a college student. It turns out that she ultimately left, and there was no support for her. There was no support for her peers. A number of the other students that were in the remedial class with her also left, deeming that college just wasn't for them. So please consider long-term education and not just paying for it, but also helping support the students through the system as you make your recommendations for reparations. Diamond Bar resident. Housing and land ownership. Issues of housing and land ownership often co-occurred across submissions. Respondents used the terms redlining, eminent domain, black displacement, and gentrification to specify both past and contemporary harms. Respondent: since our arrival in California, I have seen many things happen to the detriment of foundational black Americans, aka American freedmen. Redlining. In addition to that, lands taken by public domain or eminent domain for the freeway, the 105 freeway. Southern California resident. Respondent: and I'll say, being in Los Angeles, I've been working in the housing advocacy space for probably 4 or so years now, but I've uncovered a lot of evidence of just black displacement when it comes to land and housing issues in this state. Even currently, today, in the 21st century, there are still a lot of black Americans who are struggling in Los Angeles because they're just continuing to try to fight against poverty, fighting against the establishment, and basically just trying to sustain themselves in a state, in a country that hasn't fairly redistributed resources. We're talking about 60,000 plus homeless residents in Los Angeles. Over 40% of that is black, and when they're only 8% of the population. Los Angeles resident. Coinciding with the identifications of lack of land ownership and access to housing as sources of harm, the respondents also emphasize land as a component of reparations. Respondent: I also advocate for that infamous 40 acres and a mule that should be afforded to all, as well as cows, pigs, sheep, horses, and any other self-sustaining mechanisms to the descendants of U.S. slavery. San Lorenzo resident. Respondent: my vision for the future of Black California is to have a sovereign land for all indigenous melanated people in the land. Respondent: there's 45 million acres owned by the federal government. There's also Katie Porter, the congresswoman, who's arguing that even more of that land should be taken back from white oil executives who plan to drill on it. We, as the Black American community, are already talking about how we're going to be building solar panels on our land because we know California is moving toward green energy. So, Katie Porter is someone who could work with us to make sure that there's enough acreage of land for every Black American to receive their 40 acres claim, at least in California. New York resident raised in Alameda, California. Lineage-based reparations. Respondents primarily advocated for lineage-based reparations. Many used some iteration of the following language. Respondent: I also want the Reparations Commission to know that I strongly support their decision for lineage-based eligibility for reparations. But the purpose of this Reparations Commission is to provide reparations for slavery and the impact of slavery, its legacy and vestiges, including Jim Crow, on the descendants of U.S. slavery. New Jersey resident. Several contended that those who descended from persons enslaved in the United States have had distinct experiences. Respondent: so I say all that to say I am definitely in favor of reparations in the form of cash payments for descendants of U.S. slaves. There are a lot of different justice claims out there that people definitely should fight for, but in terms of reparative justice, these are things that specifically happened to specific people that I am a part of. And there are specific instances and grievances that need to be repaired. Santa Rosa resident. Respondent: reparations will help to repair the economics as well as obtain equity in a country of our ancestors. That lineage, that heritage continues to live on with Americans that have been here from the very beginning, not by choice, but by force. One respondent argued for broader eligibility to include descendants of anyone who was, quote, kidnapped, trafficked, enslaved, and often impregnated, end quote, regardless of race or skin color. However, this view was not expressed by the majority, who emphasized lineage-based reparations for the descendants of persons enslaved in the U.S. Additional themes: photo and mixed media submissions highlighting lesser-known histories of African Americans. As mentioned, several photos were submitted via the personal testimony portal. Additionally, materials related to 2 documentaries were submitted by respondents. The first was a 40-minute documentary on the history of reparative justice efforts beginning with Callie House and Harriet Tubman, and the second was a flyer for a forthcoming documentary about contemporary advocacy for reparative justice. Unlike other personal testimonies, these submissions, particularly the photos, often did not address specific harms or support for reparations that the task force should consider. Instead, they were connected by common theme of highlighting lesser-known histories, especially the contributions of African Americans. As indicated below, several photos were submitted that had a connection to a monument of green flake. Additional research revealed that flake, while enslaved, was integral in the westward settlement of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to the Salt Lake Valley during the mid-19th century. Another photo documented the obituary of Henry Clay Rogers, who had been born before the end of the Civil War and died in 1931, having owned 40 acres in Boone County, Missouri for nearly 50 years. The final series of photographs captures a written document on the life of Eunice Sallery, a woman brought from South Africa as a child. She lived through enslavement and died in 1927 at the age of 110 years, with 89 grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Collectively, these submissions are consistent with the theme to be discussed in the oral history findings, acknowledging what's frequently characterized by community testifiers as the, quote, true, end quote, history of African Americans. Comments on the communications and participatory process of the AB 3121 Task Force. Another finding pertained to the communications and participatory process of the AB 3121 Task Force's work. One respondent indicated a need for more clarity about how to actively participate. Respondent: I would also really appreciate a more clear process when learning how to testify in front of the California Reparations Task Force. I'm a PhD student in education. Some other people I know are graduate students, or they've been doing research and they pay attention to these things. This is also my job, to be a reparations research fellow. So I would appreciate having space and being able to know how to participate in meetings as a live actor, as a person who is from the state, who's been here for three generations, and is also a student at the same time. Finally, another testimonial submitter argued for the need for educated communications efforts, arguably that too few Black Californians are aware of the task force. Respondent: the other day, actually, I spoke to this elderly woman and her sister, and I asked them, "Hey, do you know about the reparations task force?" She said, "No, I have no idea." We visited a church here, a long-time standing church called St. Andrew's, and we asked the congregation how many people knew about the task force and what's going on with reparations right now. And maybe 10 to 20% at most knew. And there may have been 50 people in that congregation. So, whatever decision needs to be made quickly to really get this word out nationally, but especially here in California. Crack cocaine epidemic. Though not a dominant theme, multiple respondents identified the crack cocaine epidemic as a primary source of harm, emphasizing its impact on family dissolution, children, and communities. Most identified the state or federal government as complicit. Respondent: we are owed a debt for slavery. We are owed a debt for government-sanctioned genocide. We are owed a debt because California has been complicit in locking up our men and affecting 10 million families, locking up 1 million men for slavery in prisons due to the crack cocaine epidemic that you, the government, put into our communities throughout this country. Southern California resident. Respondent: I happen to be an 80s baby, and I remember the crack epidemic and the war on drugs, and my biological mother actually happened to fall victim to the crack epidemic and going into the system. And because of that, there were, unfortunately, a lot of things that happened or that we saw that should not have happened to children. Then to hear of the government's role, not only in the distribution of the substances, but also the crackdown on the people and treating addiction as a crime instead of what we see it now as a sickness. A lot of stuff ended up happening to me personally during that time, to a lot of children that were around during that time. We saw the areas that we are forced to live in degrade to levels that I wouldn't wish on anybody, and that were even worse than third world conditions, simply for the fact that we happen to be black in America and the government allowed things to happen. Santa Rosa resident. Legal protections to ensure security. Several respondents identified the legal system as a source of harm and as a target for reparative justice. One respondent uploaded a copy of her filing to the State of California 2nd Appellate District, requesting an investigation into perceived judicial misconduct and 14th Amendment violations. Other respondents more broadly spoke of the need for legal protections to ensure that reparations are successfully implemented. Respondent: I would say I would like to see reparation be structured where we can get some financial stability. Also to get land. We get access to technology, to get access to resources, and for a time we get the resources and laws and everything to go in our favor, so we can have access to those things without people attacking us and hurting us while we're doing our thing. Respondent: and so to rectify that, to rectify the harms that were done by the government, we are calling for cash payments for Black American descendants of U.S. slaves. We're calling for protections by the government and an assurance written in law that this will never happen again. Santa Rosa resident. Beyond California, federal level, and other states. Several argued that many of the stated harms connected to issues beyond California. Respondent: to me, the most important harms I want California to address the issues that happen due to migration. A lot of people in my family would not have even come this way had their land not been taken due to eminent domain down south. and I would like for that to be addressed like it was addressed with the Bruce family, with the beach over there in Manhattan Beach. I feel that these are the most important harms because they are interconnected. The housing crisis goes hand in hand with the healthcare issues. Pasadena resident. Thus, several suggested that California is setting a precedent for what they'd like to see in other states and ultimately at the federal level. Respondent. I believe that California can lead the nation in beginning to heal not just Black America, but America in general, because helping Black Americans address poverty, crime, illness, mental health, and so on and so forth. So I can stress enough that I strongly support reparations. New York resident raised in Alameda, California. Other states. Respondent. I'm here in Atlanta, Georgia, and I do support the reparations bill for a lineage basis, and I think all descendants of slaves should support this bill. I know I'm not in California, but I'm hoping they'll be able to put the same kind of bill here in Atlanta, Georgia. Respondent. I want the New Jersey Reparations Commission to know the harms in which my family is still suffering educationally, economically, psychologically. Federal level reparations. Respondent. So I would hope that we at least get some form of guarantee from Gavin Newsom, Shirley Weber, and many of the politicians out in California. The elected officials out in California have supported this measure. I hope we can get their support as far as making a demand of President Biden to set up a federal commission for reparations by executive order. I think that the damages that have been done to the Black community of America, the descendants of American chattel slavery, is too deep for any local entity to handle, and it definitely needs to be handled on the federal level. So I would support an effort to push Biden to take action. Findings from the oral history interviews. Generally, the areas of harm narrators identified fell broadly into 5 areas: education, home and land ownership, employment, forced labor and business hardship, psychological and emotional trauma, failure to acknowledge true history. Please note that to maintain confidentiality, pseudonyms are used below to identify each narrator. Education, identity, and future. Education was a significant theme across interviews. When discussing the harms related to basic education, narrators consistently connected these harms to an impact on their sense of identity. Basic education. Quote, teaching history in a way that centers our identity. I think like Black Americans just need that space. End quote. Ronnie Lynn. One respondent identified himself as the man whose blood remembers because although he does not personally remember the, quote, atrocities that were passed down from the shores of Africa to the slave ships and the American plantations, end quote, he believes, quote, each atrocity that was faced by his ancestors was written in his DNA, end quote. The man whose blood remembers attended middle school in Oakland, California in the 1990s. When his teacher's lesson on the Civil War seemed unclear compared to the lesson on the American Revolutionary War, he became curious. The man whose blood remembers. I remember being in middle school and they were presenting the Civil War, and they didn't clearly define the reason why in the book, so I asked my teacher, and he just said, because of state rights and the disagreement, you know. So I didn't know. I didn't know it was due to slavery and basically them trying to keep the Union because of slavery, which was primary reason until I got older. I remember when I found out because I had actually asked my teacher. He was teaching a subject and he couldn't even tell me the truth. The man whose blood remembers would not learn the integral factor that slavery played in the Civil War until he became an adult. Acknowledging that many history programs have improved, he noted that while the legacy of slavery is part of United States history, often the courses that go into the most depth are ethnic studies courses at a collegiate level. Thus, he argued, many Black students are left to learn their history from family members or during adulthood, contributing to a lost sense of identity. The impact of school proximity, parental advocacy. Violet Allen grew up in South Los Angeles in the 1970s. While she attended kindergarten through middle school, in her neighborhood, as her parents observed the influx of drugs and gang violence alter the community around them, they successfully petitioned to send her to school in Westchester. Despite the perceived exceptional level of education at that school, she always perceived a sentiment that she did not have a right to be there. One teacher routinely marked her grades down for talking in class, admitting only during a parent-teacher visit that he'd been marking her down for raising her hand to ask questions. When she struggled in science and math, another teacher minimized the value of courses, claiming they were unimportant. Moreover, she could not participate in extracurricular activities due to her school's distance from home. A teacher's comments about math or Violet Allen's inability to participate in after-school activities may initially seem innocuous. However, Violet Allen communicated how these shaped both her sense of self and future opportunities. Violet Allen. My mom got me a tutor through my church, and so he would meet with me at church over chemistry. And he was just amazed at what I knew. And how would I know? He just thought I was fine. And he was a teacher at a local high school. So I'm thinking to myself, if I had this teacher, it might have been different for me in terms of science and math. Like, I hate science. I'm out now. But had I had him, then it would have been different versus this woman telling me, don't worry about chemistry. It's not that important. You don't even need it. I mean, I needed it to graduate. Well, I needed it to get into the type of college I wanted to get into. And this woman is telling me I don't need it. And it just kind of placed a psychological barrier on me where I just wanted to get through this course with a decent grade. Excelling in it wasn't a concern of mine, just getting through it. Additionally, her school's distance from home meant she carpooled with her neighbor, who taught at the school. Thus, when her neighbor left, Violet Allen left, with colleges often using extracurricular activities as a gauge for student discipline. She was less able to reflect that. Violet Allen. Well, I do know that one of the things that high school students do is they get involved in extracurricular activities so that they can bolster their college application. They want to be able to say they participated in this club or did this sport. It shows discipline, ability to discipline oneself, to stay focused. I wasn't able to necessarily show that through school. In terms of after school, let's say I wanted tutoring, I couldn't get at that at school or meet with that teacher after school to go over math problems. When I left school, I left. And I'll tell you that it's this lady across the street from me, the one I was telling you about, who was a piano teacher. She worked at Redondo. She was a PE teacher. So I was able to drive in with her, and so I drove with her in the morning, and I left with her in the afternoon. So when she left work, I left work. Juxtaposing her own experience to that of her daughter, she reflected that distance also meant difficulty in parental advocacy. As mentioned, it was only after her mother visited the school that her teacher admitted to penalizing her for raising her hand. When her daughter recently requested a more rigorous math class, Violet Allen could submit her daughter's grades with letters from her teacher and math tutor and then follow up with the principal. The difference between her experience and her daughter's is that having a quality school for her daughter near their home increased the feasibility of Violet Allen's parental engagement and advocacy. Professional education access. Two narrators spoke about the challenges of gaining access to professional education. The man whose blood remembers spoke about two medical professionals, his wife and his brother, who struggled to gain entry into medical programs in California despite high grades, while his brother, the first in their family to go to college, ultimately became a nurse practitioner. The pressure of having to support himself through school financially slowed his progress. For his wife's pursuit of a registered nursing RN program, her commitment ultimately forced her out of state. The Man Whose Blood Remembers. And, and just to share, my wife is a nurse too. And so she ended up having high honors when she graduated from LVM nursing school. But she couldn't get into any RN programs in the state of California despite that. So she basically had to go to school in Idaho because they ended up just accepting her. Like immediately. Like, you know what? Not immediately. There's a process. But I mean, they saw, like her experience and everything, and they accepted her. But she, like all the programs that she tried to buy for in the state of California, like she couldn't get in any despite having high honors. I think she had the fourth or third highest GPA of her graduating class. Interviewer: What year was this that your wife was trying to get into RN programs? The Man Whose Blood Remembers: It was a process, so it was probably like a couple of years where she was trying different ones. I would say maybe like between 2015 and 2017, because I believe 2018 is when she actually started the program. Interviewer: Yes, and had to go to Idaho for it? The Man Whose Blood Remembers: Yes, yeah, because I wanted to make sure she was able to succeed at what she wanted to do. So while she was there, I had the kids with me here, despite at that time I was working 2 full-time jobs. And so then I ended up just start working 1, but I was still working overtime and stuff. And so I had all 4 of the kids while she went to school because I wanted to make sure she was able to do what she actually wanted to do. Similar to The Man Whose Blood Remembers, Violet Allen also spoke of the challenges of attaining professional education. An administrative judge with a state regulatory agency, Violet Allen doubts whether she would have pursued law again if she had known the cost. After being waitlisted and subsequently denied entry to the University of California, Hastings, she began attending law school in 1995 at a private institution. Though her father's veteran status would have covered her tuition at a state school, attending a private university required her to take out loans. She graduated in 1999 with $85,000 in debt. After 25 years of loan payments, she still owes $50,000. While she spent the last 10 years as a civil servant, because her loans were unsubsidized, it's only under the temporary update to the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program that she would have had a chance at her loans being discharged. Violet Allen's story is significant because it illustrates that even in her apparently successful position, the impact of student debt is significant. That student debt integrally shaped her career choices. Violet Allen: Everybody has their own opinions about reparatory justice and what it should look like. For me, and this is just for me, I personally believe that educational opportunities, and specifically not having to incur the amount of debt that I did, would have made a world of difference for me, and the type of law that I could have and would have practiced. I think I would have definitely done something different with my career. I would have probably worked in civil rights. I would have probably done some nonprofit work. I would have probably worked in areas to serve the needs of people who didn't have access to lawyers. I had to pay back loans, so I had to have a job where I was getting money to pay back my loans. So I initially started in a private industry. I started as a private attorney. And that's just because of the choices, the limitations that I had, with the types of choices I could make. I couldn't be a nonprofit attorney. I couldn't be a civil rights attorney. Couldn't afford it. The through line in many of the narrators' accounts is that their pursuit of higher education was motivated by the belief that earning a degree would open doors for greater opportunity. However, as discussed with respect to housing and employment as well, the returns on degrees have often been less than promised. And that will conclude our reading for tonight of Chapter 32, Harm and Repair. We are stopping on page 951, and we'll continue on page 952 at Employment, Forced Labor, and Business Hardship.
And that will conclude tonight's reading of Chapter 32 of the California Reparations Task Force's final report. Before you go, if you haven't done so already, don't forget to like this video, hit the bell for reminders, subscribe to our YouTube channel. When you go, don't forget, get connected, follow CJEC on all social media, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and Twitter at CJEC Official. Get informed. Visit www.cjecofficial.org and sign up for current and accurate California reparation news and info. Get on our Get Involved page. Get involved. Support our work by volunteering and or donating. To donate, just click the Donate tab on the homepage of our website. Special thanks to our amazing fiscal sponsor, the California Black Women's Health Project. Thank you all so much for your time. I appreciate you all. We are closer to the reparations than we ever been in California. Have a great night.